Welcome to the Parent Advocate Podcast, a show where we celebrate, defend, support, and uplift the voices of the LGBTQIA community. I'm your host, Stephen Chikumba. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I'm joined by my amazing co-host, Lizette Stephen.
Hey everyone, Lizette here, she, her, aya. The mission of the Parent Advocate Podcast is to elevate conversations and reframe narratives around trans and non-binary youth. Each week, we bring you our take on all things happening from the perspective of two parents of BIPOC transgender kids.
Lizette, this is going to be a show for the ages. That's all I have to tell you. We have a special guest, Lydia Otero, on our show, and I cannot wait to get to her.
Steven, I can't wait either.
Welcome everyone once again to the Parent Advocate Podcast. Let's get started. Lizette, can we just talk about Harris for president? I don't care what else has been going on in your week, but I just have to hear about your version of the Kamala Harris takeover that's happening in your state, and I'll share mine.
First off, I'm already brat girl summer ready. Oh, you can't see it. Look at the screen. Where is it at? There it is. There it is. Now I disappeared. Anyway. So I just have to say that when I was on a panel when President Biden dropped out of the race, we knew it was coming, or we had heard rumblings that it was coming, and I felt nervous. But within hours, it just felt like we went into a different dimension. You know, like people are like, dimensional shifts happen all the time. I was like, oh my gosh, it feels like we're in a different dimension, quote unquote. And I feel hopeful again because I was feeling the drear and the dread and the worry. When I tell you that people are hyped, they're ready. They're gonna go vote.
So I need to hear about your week from a Kamala Harris lens. Talk to me.
Okay. So on Saturday, we did a panel around parenting trans youth up in Phoenix for Lookout Phoenix publication. And it was really amazing. And I think it was cool to hear other people's perspectives as we were hearing the news drop immediately. Yesterday, we got to be on an Out for Kamala Harris HRC call. It was a long telethon, is what it felt like. But let's talk about who was on there. Daniel lost his mind when That's So Raven Simone came on. Daniel was like, we had Sophia Bush. We had Wonder Woman herself come out and endorse. We had Wilson Cruz. The best of the best showed up. Daniel and I were super honored to be a part of that fundraising effort. Today, I got to meet with Julia Chavez. Daniel and I both did, in a small roundtable of about 15 Latino leaders in our city alongside Mayor Romero. And we got to have real conversations around housing insecurity, water, because, you know, we're going to run out of water here in Arizona in no time. And trans rights, gender affirming care, repro rights, public education, really, really important things that meet at all of our intersections. And I can't tell you how impressed I was by her staff. They're really focused on Arizona. And I was just like grateful and relieved to hear their commitment to listening to people and to doing what's right by our communities. Now tell me about your week, because now that we're in full election swing, all of us are going to be busy.
Lizette, I can't even begin to tell you about the black boy joy that I experienced when I heard the news that Kamala Harris was going to be running for president. Because I have been saying that everything that's happened to this point has been strategic. I haven't shared that loudly, but I've been like, he's not an unsmart man. Genocide Joe, whatever you want to say, he's not an unsmart man. And so because he's not an unsmart man, and because I see the tides of democracy have been shifting, it is super, super important that we recognize that, once again, Black women are going to pull us back from the abyss. Let's be 100% clear. The first fundraiser since she was announced was women putting up numbers. 44,000 of them put up 1.5 million in 3 hours, followed by the brothers who came in at a solid 1.3, 52,000 people on that call. I was on that call. I was on the call. I was just like, go, Roland Martin, okay? West, like all the heavy hitters came through. You know, Bill Bellamy, one of my people from back in the day.
Bill Bellamy was there?
Bill Bellamy, like they had all the people thems. Next day, who come through? HRC, LGBTQ crew comes, drop 300,000 on them. You know what I'm saying? 22,000, drop 300,000. White women came through, 2 million.
150,000 women on one fucking Zoom.
They said they broke Act Blue. Good. Broke it. They couldn't take any money. You know what I'm saying? I think they raised 1.5 million in however long they were on. But it's like everybody, even white men, there was only 1,200 of them or 1,300, but those 1,300 really showed up. They showed up and they raised pays a little penny too, a little coin.
They have their call on the 29th. They have another call on the 29th. So
They have
maybe
a
they'll show up
do-over.
again.
They have a do-over. They have a
They're like-
do-over. But go do it over. Do it
Yes.
over. But Lizette, that's the week I've been having. Oh, and Hobbs had top surgery, so there's that too.
Oh, that's the best news of the entire week. Is he
Like,
happy?
okay, now remember who we're talking about. We're talking about low-key Hobbs, who don't get real rah-rah over anything. He's just taking in stride. It's just Thursday. You feel me? Like, that's how this dude has been acting. Came out of surgery, was a little groggy, the same old dude trying to tell dad jokes in his grogginess. He's been so super chill, low-key, no pain, no discomfort. Like, it's just another day, and I am super grateful for that. Listen, when I tell you, like, I lost it yesterday because when they pulled us to the back for, like, they do the pre-prep stuff, and then they're like, come back and you can sit with him, and then they go over all the consent things, and then they wheel him off for surgery. And so we're sitting there, and they have those little curtains drawn so you can't see anybody, but you have your little space. And I hear through the curtain a woman complaining that her headaches haven't gone away since she had her spinal tap, and that they're just getting worse. And I hear them talking about, well, with your condition, there's not a lot we can do. And I'm immediately catapulted backwards in time to August 2016 when I'm listening to the doctors tell Chanel and I the exact same thing, and she's there for surgery. She goes into surgery and she never wakes up. That's the memory I'm sitting now with as my son is about to go into surgery, and I haven't been in a surgical environment in a hospital in 8 years since my wife's life went away in a hospital, and my son is about to go under. And I was like, I heard that through the curtain, and I was just like, son of a bitch, because now I have to stay solid for this dude, but internally I'm freaking the fuck out. Like, I'm freaking the fuck out. And like, they wheel him away, give him a pound, see you in a couple hours, X, Y, and Z. I make a beeline to the hotel, and I just had to fucking cry my life. Like, I just let it out because, like, I don't think I processed Chanel's passing in that way before. Just hearing that woman through the curtain just brought it in full relief. And yeah, man. So he's doing great. Apparently, I got some stuff to talk to my therapist about. But yeah, I was like, wow.
Well, Stephen, thank you for sharing that with our listeners, because grief is nonlinear.
Yes.
Right? It's nonlinear, and it's okay to feel nervous and worried for your child he's having a major surgery. Two things can exist at one time. You can feel nervous about his health and also feel really excited for him being whole in his body.
Exactly.
So,
yes.
Yeah.
So I didn't mean to go all therapy session on y'all. We have a whole show to get to. So how about we get to today's topics?
Oh, wait, Stephen, before, I just want to say, my dad once a year loves all of us to go to the water park for the summer, for one day in the summer. When I tell you that Jose is red wastewater up, because it was 112 degrees. And so as we get excited about Kamala, we have to remember to center not just the rights and well-being and safety of our people when it comes to social justice issues, but we got to talk about climate. Climate is a social justice issue. So anyway, Jose is burnt like a tomato. I thought it would make you giggle. And it's hot as hell out here.
And make sure we get him some calamine lotion, you know what I'm saying? Cool off that hot ass skin. But before we talk about our lives anymore, we have a whole show to get to. So let's get to today's topics.
Let's do it.
Apparently, my fraternity, Alpa Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, approved an amendment to their constitution, changing membership requirements to reflect that only natural-born males could be members of the organization. The proposal, which will be forwarded to the entire body for a vote at next summer's general election, will determine whether or not this change becomes effective. And this is a classic demonstration of what we're seeing all over the country. Old heads want to impose their myopic views on the world on the rest of us, and the rest of us have to fight back against these draconic minority positions that don't seem to align with where the rest of us are. As a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, it really pains me to see that an organization which should be leading the fight for inclusion and was a vanguard for Black progress in collegiate institutions is moving backwards.
Well, Stephen, I have to ask you, what are you going to do to organize your brothers, first of all, to make the right choice from your general convention next summer? And secondly, how does it make you feel vote because Pops has the opportunity to become a legacy member.
So what am I going to do? I am going to tell every brother that I know to vote no to that proposal. I've already written a open letter to our president, which I'm just waiting to publish because I've been asked to hold on to it. But like, I've already made it plain. Like, I have sons. My sons are going to college or in college. My sons should be joining the fraternity if they're so inclined, but they can't be so inclined to join an organization that discriminates against either one of them or one of their siblings. That just doesn't jive. That just doesn't jive that this organization, which is supposed to be this progressive, liberal, civil rights leaning organization that understands it was founded because of discrimination on college campuses towards people of color. That's specifically why the first Greek letter organizations, the Black Greek letter organizations, were founded. They couldn't join white Greek letter fraternity or sororities. And so how are you now going to be the one to say, no, you can't join because you were not assigned male at birth? That's just ludicrous. There's no basis for it. There's nothing about what our organization does that requires you to have a dingaling between your legs in order to do the work. That's not a thing. And even if you were not born with one, it doesn't stop people from identifying as male and seeking membership in the organization. It just doesn't make any sense.
I just want to say Black trans men are men deserving of being part of brotherhood on their campuses.
Period.
All right, Stephen, we're going to dive into the RNC because let's talk about it. There was a lot happening, but I think what I found the most interesting was that in Milwaukee, Grindr spiked and then broke because there were so many RNC members looking for hookups in Milwaukee. The buzz surrounding allegedly increased Grindr traffic in Milwaukee rapidly spread on social media. Even ex-Congressman George Santos, who said he met his husband on Grindr, got involved.
Okay, now I'm going to tell you that when I saw this, I thought it was a joke. I thought it was people just fucking around for shits and giggles on the interwebs. And then I actually started looking. And because they published the data, they show where these spikes are. They show what happens when the RNC comes to town anywhere. Multiple, I think there's another one called like Furry or something, which also saw a spike. And these are gay dating apps. The RNC, Christian right, family values and morals, is out here hooking up anonymously with these gay dating apps. It's just too rich.
I mean, they just need to stop with all the repressive rhetoric at this point. We see you. Grindr saw you.
Grindr saw you. So in a bit of good news, a federal judge rejected Moms for Liberty's request to expand their injunction on Title IX gender identity protections. A Trump-appointed federal judge rejected a request from activist groups, including Moms for Liberty, to expand his injunction, blocking the Biden administration from implementing a new Title IX rule. The new rule bans discrimination based on gender identity in healthcare as part of the Affordable Health Care Act. But the judge also refused to lessen the scope of his injunction at the request of the Biden administration.
I'm just happy to see that even a Trump-appointed judge is going to be nonpartisan and rule based on precedent and what is right, as opposed to what we've been seeing at SCOTUS. And so I think it's really, really important for people to understand that Title IX does protect gender and sex and sexuality, and we just need to stop with all these horrible lawsuits trying to keep trans people from getting the protections that they deserve and need. Okay, so let's get back into our Harris energy. On Saturday, President Joe Biden dropped out of the presidential race, and VP Kamala Harris became the presumptive Democratic nominee. Within less than a week, she has become the new candidate for Democrats, winning support from enough delegates to become the presumptive nominee. In the past week, Harris has gained the endorsement of influential Democrats, broke fundraising and Zoom records, and even joined TikTok. To round out her whirlwind week, she will be appearing in a pre-recorded appearance on RuPaul's Drag Race All Stars, which is set to stream Friday on Paramount+. The show has long advocated for voting rights, and Harris will appear urging Americans to register to vote. Harris's appearance comes after Democrats rallied behind her this week with key endorsements for former President Barack Obama and former First Lady Michelle Obama.
All I know is, won't she do it? Won't she do it? We started the top of this show talking about all the ways in which Kamala Harris has just invigorated this race, and it's perfect that we end on this topic talking about Biden dropping out and endorsing Kamala Kamala Harris and just the whirlwind that has followed in the wake of that announcement. But enough of these topics. We've got to get to our guest.
Let's do it.
Lydia Otero is a writer, historian, and activist deeply rooted in the Arizona-Sonora border region where they were born and raised. Lydia's experiences as a queer activist and a blue-collar worker from 1978 to 1998 in Los Angeles formed the basis of their latest book, LA Interchanges. Lydia holds a PhD in history and received a BA in 1992 and an MA in 1996 from Cal State, Los Angeles. From 2003 to 2020, Lydia was a tenured professor in the Department of Mexican American Studies at the University of Arizona. Lydia was appointed an OAH Distinguished Lecturer by Philip J. Deloria, president of the Organization of American Historians, in 2021, and from 2020 to 2022, they served as the historian for the Tucson-Pima County Historical Commission, which is responsible for preserving the region's rich historical heritage. Everyone, please welcome Lydia Otero to our show.
Welcome to the show. I'm so excited that you're here with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on Parent Advocates, Lizette. And you are such an advocate that I often feel like what I'm doing is so minuscule compared to what you're doing. Seeing who's out in public, but you're very public and you're very much on the go a lot.
Yeah, no, you paved the way. And so I'm in awe of you. And I'm just excited that you're here today. Our first question is, for our listeners who've not had the opportunity to read your book, tell us what it was like growing up brown and queer in the Southwest.
Yeah, it's a hard story to tell in terms of just like short. I'm going to start with my mother. We all have that special relationship, engagement with our parents, but my father was born 1910 and my mother was born 1913. For your listeners, just imagine having a parent that would be like over 110 years old and expecting that she would get what it was like to be queer. Like I was born in 1955. I knew from the get-go, from the get-go when I had consciousness that I was queer because she was my mother. She knew too, right? But we didn't really talk about it. But I sometimes wonder, like maybe I cut her a break too often in not having those conversations with her because we didn't. And she didn't have the language to have those conversations. See, here I'm cutting her a break again. But I wonder how she experienced queerness in her lifetime. I don't think she was queer, although I run into people all the time who think their parents were queer or their mother was queer. But I don't think she was queer. But I wonder, like in the early 20th century, how she experienced queerness and who she was. She must have, but she never talked about it. So in growing up brown and queer here in Tucson, not far from where we are, was just one of not talking about it. For me as a child, it was just like a survival, trying to, but always paying attention, always, but knowing I didn't fit. Knowing that you could upset the people close to you by behaving a certain way, by insisting on certain things. Like there were times before I was 10 when I acquiesced and I wore a dress because my mother insisted that I wear a dress. Now those could have become larger battles. After 10 years old, they were, but sometimes I knew I had to like acquiesce and do things I didn't want to do. I wonder now that I'm older, I'm going to be 70 soon, I never felt unloved. Despite what I'm saying to you in terms of it being hard to have had expressed my queer self, I felt not accepted. I felt out of sorts. I felt like I didn't belong. But in that environment with my family, I never felt unloved. And, I don't know how to reconcile that or reconcile those feelings. That's just the way it was back in the 1950s and for me. And everybody, and you of all people know, everybody has their own story.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. That's a lot. It's funny on our show when we ask questions, we never quite know what we're going to get. And the way people open up and share who they are, that level of vulnerability, it's always refreshing to have it happen. And I just love the fact that we can be so open on the show. One of the things that I actually love, like before we started recording, you and Lizette were talking about like pop culture things, and we're all very much pop culture people on this call right now. The little tidbit you shared about the rumor about Shaka Khan and Natalie Cole having been lovers. Lizette told me that there was an incident where you bumped into George Burns on an elevator. What role do you see art and visibility playing in culture shifting, and why was it important for you to weave these types of stories into your book?
I think that it were important in terms of imagining me being different, living in a different world than I lived in as a child. So I lived in a very predictable place and very traditional place. Sundays, we'd wake up and we'd have menudo, and my mother would put on her records. And, it was very regular. The way we celebrated birthday parties were very much like a piñata and a bunch of cousins. So I understood the traditional part of it, but I didn't, and I appreciated it to a degree, but I never appreciated traditional music or traditional ways. I was always suspect of them because anything traditional meant confinement to me. So I was always into, when I was growing up, Twiggy, the Beatles, and all of these other things, other ideas that were filtering in through the TV, because that to me had the potential and the promise of being different. When my mother played the music that she played and I listened to it, I liked it, but that didn't hold the possibility of me being queer. For, now many years later, you do have people like Ana Gabriel who came out, but at that time I didn't see it. And I guess all my life I've been a little suspect about people who are very invested in making the traditional look cool, because I just don't know it is. So yeah, pop culture meant a lot. It meant possibility of freedom. And moving to LA, of course, it's like a whole different scene, right? It was like I was at a movie theater once where Madonna was in. I mean, when Madonna in the 80s was Madonna. So I had these encounters with people in the same spaces, which would have seemed unimaginable to me growing up here in Tucson, in this polvadero over there by the freeway. So yeah, that was the cool part about being in LA. But yeah, modern, different, all of that. I've always found that very attractive. That's why I like young people that, because they're different than me and they're bringing new ideas, and new stuff is always cool.
It's so
I
funny.
always say this because I don't even know if they're going to listen to their podcast, but I don't know if even I can be friends with people from high school because they're just so unlike me. And they're like, there's nothing I can learn from them. And young people, like, I'm there because they've got something to teach me and new ideas. I want people to challenge me so that I can see the world different. I already know what it's like to be me and see the world a certain way. I want to see the possibility.
I love that. I love that you say that. I love talking to young trans kids and like their experiences, and young people too that are younger than me, but I guess I'm still young too. I think it's always exciting to hear like how they perceive the world. Like Daniel and I today were talking about the election, right? Because we have a nominee in Kamala Harris. And I was like, are your friends scared? Because I got a phone call from an older community member this morning who was like, I'm really scared. And I was like, but what are kids thinking? Like, what are teenagers that are moving into that? Like, they will be in college with the next administration. Like, what are they seeing? And Daniel's like, I don't know if we're afraid. He told me some Gen Z's got it locked in or something. And I was like, okay, what does that mean? Like, I want to know.
Right. I'm fascinated with that too. I'm really excited about, and I think I sense on social media, I pick up on young people's ideas. And that's why I'm into social media, because it is through those mediums that you get these different expressions and these different opinions. I am excited about the possibility of Kamala Harris being our president. She was born and raised in San Francisco. She knows queerness, like in a way that no other president ever knew queerness. I mean, that was her reality in San Francisco. So I'm excited about that part of it.
And I also love Charlie XCX. And so I was already about Brat Summer, but I was really excited that Kamala like really kind of dug into this pop culture, Brat Summer kind of thing.
Yeah.
Really quickly, is it Kamala or Kamala? Because I think it's Kamala, and y'all been saying Kamala. So I want to make sure that we are honoring her name, number one. And number two, when I was at the White House, Miss Thing was throwing down. She had the bombest pride event at the Veep's house that I have ever attended. I've only been to one, so I don't have a lot of reference points for the statement, but it was so amazing. And I have to say, Lydia, Kamala is a friend of queer people, period. She is a friend of queer people. And I think proximity to queer people gave her the ability to understand we're just people, nothing exotic about them.
Yeah.
But if you are part of that ignorant mass that doesn't actually interact with members of the LGBTQ plus community, you have no frame of reference. And so you're listening to people tell you about a community that you don't actually experientially know.
Right.
So it's easy for you to be swayed by the foolishness. But they finna find out. They're gonna find out. Come November 5th, they're gonna find out. I'm sorry, Lisette, this is your turn. My bad.
But,
No,
but
no, no,
Stephen, you should be the one that tells us it's Kamala or Kamala, because you've had these experiences, you know, like you've partied with her.
You've met her.
So,
I've been
that was
calling
a
her
nice way
Kamala.
of informing y'all both. It's Kamala.
Kamala,
Well,
okay.
I've been calling her Kamala because of her friend Kamala. So
Right.
I need to fix it.
You need to fix it.
Okay.
You need to fix it.
All right.
I like it's like got a Latina twinge to it, Kamala.
Stephen and I have a mutual friend named Kamala who's very clear that it's Kamala, and she's from LA, and
Yes.
so I
Yes.
just got used to.
You know, again, that's why I'm like, you know, I was trying to be genteel.
I see.
With correction.
Yeah.
But yes, thank you, Lydia. I was actually doing exactly what you said. But again, back to the podcast.
Okay, I'll ask my question now.
Okay.
In January 2024, non-binary reporter Joe Yerkaba published an article about a study that had been conducted called Aunties, Aunts, and Tias, the Forgotten Other Mother Supporting and Housing LGBTQ Youth. It was the first research study done on LGBTQ youth in aunthood and was part of a larger 2-year longitudinal study on LGBTQ youth, support from family members who aren't parents, and housing stability. The study noted that more than 80% of unhoused youth are BIPOC, and 70% of that population are trans, non-binary, gender fluid, people of color. The study also shared the importance of extended family and BIPOC communities. When I started reading LA Interchanges, and you talked about your tia Mense, did I say it correctly?
Mincy, yeah.
Mincy, and how she was a source of support, of love, and that you lived with her within this bracket of age, right? The study was 13 to 24. You were 23, living with your tia who unspokenly knew who you were and loved you and took care of you. What was that support like for you? Like, as you look back on it now, what do you think of the importance of that support in the framework of this larger study? Because I couldn't unsee this study from your story, because it's the story of so many people we know and love, right? Is that they found home with extended family often.
Right. And I think I touched on some of it when I said that growing up brown and queer here in Tucson in the 50s and 60s was tough. And I felt certain ways, but I never felt unloved. And I think that my tia Mincy is an example of that, and some of my other tias. And I think that sometimes, even in my mother, I could see that they were, and maybe I'm totally making this up, but I could read into them that they were glad I was queer, that I was glad. I mean, I grew up with my mother saying, you can't be this way. It's not possible for you to be this way. But there were moments later in life when I became an adult where I felt like she could see that there was less restrictions and that I had more freedoms than she would have, or more freedoms than I would have had if I would have gotten married straight out of high school and had a family. Instead, I was able to have more freedoms to explore. I think my tia Mincy was that way too. I mean, she found my life totally exciting in that I had a certain freedom she never had. And of course, in that book, I tell you how, or I try to explain how my uncle still had the power. She had to prepare his bath every time he came home, and she had to have dinner ready. So, but I was her outlet toward getting out in the world and just having fun and being reckless. There was a point where I wanted to be a construction worker, and my tío Mando said, no, you can't be a construction worker, and, blew a fuse because he didn't want me to do it. And of course, I wasn't going to listen to him. But she had to take me outside of their relationship to say, hey, do what you want to do. If you want to be a construction worker, be it. If I would have had the choice, or if I would have had that option, I would have chose it. So I think that they nurture us. And I know from my experience that I was nurtured, but as queer people, we also offer an example of a different kind of life and opportunity. And it's not always negative for them. them, because it has to be reciprocated, right? And so I think that perhaps the study didn't read into that. They saw us, I mean, I think all human beings, despite what they say, want us all to live in a better world. And all of us, not just queer folks. But I think that my tia certainly wanted a different world for me and a better world for me.
So Lydia, you talk about the way your mother didn't really like support you, didn't encourage your queerness. Like she knew you were queer, but there were consequences of you living queer in her household. Like that wasn't going to go down. How did that impact you as a child? And then what advice would you give parents who find themselves raising a child that is not heteronormative? What advice would you give them?
Yeah, I think that it was mind-blowing to me, Stephen, when I wrote my first book, In the Shadows of the Freeway, and I had my book release party at my high school. The queer group, I Am, Are You, or some they had a acronym name. They sponsored my book launch, and not too many people get to have their book launch at their high school, which to me was totally symbolic, right? But I kind of never had experienced witnessing a parent totally loving their trans youth. And luckily, a friend of mine took a photo of that moment, but I remember it like it was yesterday, right? This mother said to me, can you take a picture with my son? And I said, sure. And he came and stood, and he was a trans man. And she stepped away to take the photograph. And I could just see, loved him and accepted him totally. And it was just very, very emotional moment for me to see that was possible. And that is possible, to be accepting and to be loving, and maybe possible, but I have never seen it until more recent days, because I think there's just so much shame, especially around people of color and communities of color, when you don't have a lot of material things, and that sometimes reputation or what neighbors think of you means a little bit more. I don't know, maybe I'm just making that up, but I do think with my mother, though, that I have witnessed a lot of racism, because she was very dark skinned. I felt a little ashamed of her. Now I feel ashamed of me, because I didn't have the language to work out and say, hey, this is not what we are witnessing right now. What we are experiencing is racism. Instead, as a child, I thought something was wrong with my mother. So those are big things that a child has to carry with them, that I felt shame from my mother. My mother, too, she told me, if you're going to be that way, you got to leave. For a long time, I carried that. It was very heavy, like my mother didn't want me. And then I guess about when I was writing the book, then it came to me that she said that, and she requested that, and she put it out there. It was coming from a place of caring. It was coming from a place of love, that if you're going to live in that way and be that way, you're not going to be able to do it and live that way here. So I wrote an article that's not out yet, but it's about drawing a parallel between queer folks in the 70s and 80s who had to leave their home to be queer, with immigrants from the South, from Nicaragua, Guatemala, who were leaving their homes just to live. And it's a similar dynamic, and it's still happening now in some families. I'm not saying that that's totally done with, but I think that in my generation, leaving to live was something that other people were doing too, like leaving their homes, moving out, moving to big urban cities in order to find themselves, in order to have a life. And that's a shared experience that has been underexplored, I think.
I'm loving that you're bringing this up, because Stephen and I have talked often on this podcast that there's so much that's happening in conversations with our families and in conversations with each other and ourselves that like open doors and also reveal things that we have to work through and heal. Like we talk often about colorism and its impacts, right? On our podcast, we've talked a lot about the ways in which white families who are supporting trans youth are actually utilizing safety measures that communities of color, that queer communities of color were utilizing for themselves for safety. And there's no critical kind of understanding of why they're doing it. They just are doing these things that often perpetuate shame or perpetuate white supremacy or perpetuate biases that we all carry. And I think it's like this gift that we get to have, to be at these intersections and to share with each other how we're moving, like, and how we're reframing. Because I had an experience with my dad when I shared about Daniel was, why are you making it so hard? We didn't make it hard with your sister, right? Like your sister, we just didn't say anything. We loved her. We let her be.
Yeah.
But he was like, why are you making it so hard? What if he is like Ariana? And my sister will tell you, I think I'm genderqueer. Like I don't use, lesbian, I use gay, right? Like that's how I see myself. And so like, it's really interesting because at the time when my dad said that to me, I was like offended. And I was like, you need to leave. I need time to process what you've just told me. As I've thought more on it and he and I have talked more about it, it was like, Lizette, life was already hard for us, right? Like he came at 5 years old. He worked the fields as a child before he went to school. The poverty, he didn't even graduate high school. And started a business. And like, I mean,
Lydia.
I know. I'm so sorry. I know. But like these things that you're talking about are like so important. And so I'm excited to hear you connect the dots between the immigrant right movement and Chicano rights movement, because you and I have talked about that. I know you and I have both talked about that. And so my question to you is, because Stephen's like, you talk too much. My question to you is, what do you think is the greatest way to connect the dots for younger generations to see themselves historically in these larger movements, but also to get our families to see we're people as part of these larger movements that have been erased? Does that make sense?
It makes sense. It's part of the reason that motivated me to write In the Shadows of the Freeway. And it was released in 2019. I was in this point in my life where I could write what I wanted to write. And I felt like it was very important to tell this story because as I'm getting older, I'm going to tell that story, right? And I think that's when we look back in the past. I know that Daniel has like expressed this. They want to see themselves in the past. They want to see where we're queers, what we're queers doing, because it's for young people, it's very validating for them to know that they were there. I was really on board and all down, like I got to tell this story because it's going to be erased. And, it's important to tell this. It's not so much that it's my story, but it's a story about a working class queer born in 55. And I tried in that book to write about the queers that I knew that were older than me, like the generations before me. But what I'm recognizing now is what you just mentioned, is that through me, young queers are seeing themselves. And it's such an important dynamic because I think it's just human nature to want to see yourself in history, to want to see yourself in the past. And some new questions have come up now that I hope to address in the future with my cousin Connie, who was born in the 1940s. She was very butch and she always referred to her as her. And in this recent book, I had somebody read it and I said, I call Connie a they and sometimes call Connie a he. And they like, you can't do that because Connie didn't call themselves that. So you can't do that. And I listened to them and I took it out. But then there's this new, this new exploration about post-transness now. If they didn't have that language, how are they going to identify as trans? Are we doing the trans folks from the past a disservice and saying we're only going to call them what they identify themselves as? Well, there were no options. It was he, her, and that's it. So I think that even I'm learning in terms of identities and people in the past. And I think that we hope that in the future we give ourselves permission, like internally and externally, permission to imagine what was rumored, to maybe make it more real for young people, because I think there's a need to locate themselves in history.
That really segues perfectly into this question that I have for you. In the documentary Unidad, Gay and Lesbian Latinos United, you talked about the erasure of Black and brown queerness in the larger white dominated movement spaces. Now, we have seen small changes since then, but not many. What's your advice for advocates navigating that today? And how do we bring our stories and our histories to the forefront?
I think that documentary is a vehicle, even though I do think that it could have tried to highlight that I identify as they, them. That was pretty much funded by AIDS Project Los Angeles and community groups. It never received funding from big organizations. And I think that there has to be funding from a consciousness that if you want to tell these stories that are not the mainstream stories, that somehow you have to find a way to fund them. And I think that's key. And I think about the way that my books have seen the light of day and gotten published. It wasn't because course, I have an agent, and my agent got me a publisher. I mean, I had to go through this like obscure way of getting published. I mean, I found a way to get published, and I started my own press, but it's still a form of self-publishing, and some people look down on it. See how people look down on it? It's still the sickness. I mean, I think that there should be an understanding that we're trying to do something when you're outside of the mainstream, when you're trying to highlight these people and these ideas that aren't going to get funded by the mainstream, that there has to be other ways of giving people voice and telling stories. And I think that we have to be on board with that. And we have to perhaps give documentaries a chance, or books a chance, and not hold them up to these different standards, because we're kind of sneaking in there. We're kind of making noise, but it's not because we were allowed to, because we're insistent. We don't know how else to do it. I think that's so important. I know there's this young queer, and he wants me to publish his book through my press. And I'm telling him, look, I want you to start your own press and start publishing, and I'll show you how to do that. And that's more important to me, to show him how to do it, than for me to do it for him. So that kind of sharing, that kind of information, putting that information out there, I think is important. But when I think about even older people, older white people, my generation, who were at that time gay and lesbian leaders in the 80s and the 90s, I sent them emails and I said, hey, I got this new book about me being an activist, and you knew me and we worked together. They're not the ones who ever bothered to post about the book or even read the book, these white activists. It was really the young queers of color who have taken to my work. And why I was so surprised and disappointed, but it's like they're trying to keep what's theirs, right? They're not trying to share their limelight with queers of color, and they know we were there, but sometimes that dynamic is very threatening to some people, and still is, and it's threatening to queers. Before, in the 80s and 90s, I also discovered, and it's just a fact, that a lot of queer leaders, and at that time gay and lesbian leaders, even around AIDS, were real estate agents, and they had a lot of money. So at the same time that they're doing great things for the queer community, they're undermining communities of color down Sunset. So I mean, it's always very complicated, right?
Yeah, it is. And I think it continues to get complicated as the younger generation gets clearer and clearer and where their values are, right? Because they're seeing the world in such a distinct way. I wanted to ask you if you would share with us, because Daniel loved this story so much, about the glue event at Dodger Stadium. And I think that Daniel loved it so much because it's very reminiscent to Gen Z disruptions. Like, for example, when I can't remember, but I think it was like all the K-pop people reserved seats in a stadium for a Trump rally to make sure that that all the seats were empty, right? Like they do like these really kind of fun disruptions. And I think for Daniel, that Dodger Stadium one felt like that too.
So it's got to be 83. And the glue president, David Gonzalez, just came up with the idea, let's buy these group tickets to the Dodger game. We used to hang out and go to the Dodger game often, but this was like a conscious effort to bring a group together. And if we brought a group together, I think it was either 30 tickets or 40 tickets, then they would put your group's name on the jumbothon. And so we did it. We went in and we all sat down. I still kind of doubted that they were going to do it, right? Because it was gay and lesbian, Latinos Unidos. And it was like, yeah, are they going to do it? And a lot of us were like, okay, we're here. We followed the rules. And is it going to happen? And it did happen. It was, 30 seconds or something. But I think it was just like surprising to us too, out there, right? Emanating in the atmosphere that the words gay and lesbian were out there in such big letters. And to the stadium, like, over 30,000 people that were there who saw it. I think that was disruptive in a way that brought us a lot of joy. Mm-hmm. But then I can see how there would be critiques that, what did you do? Because I see the critiques often around my work. Yeah, but did you really change things by that? And I think that sometimes as a community, we're really hard in terms of the expectations. The world did not change because of that. we experience joy, we experience pleasure, and we experience a sense of accomplishment and possibility. And that is change. And in this microsecond, 30 seconds, that happened. But I think that sometimes we judge by these, yeah, but did it lead to this and this? And we can't tell. Even chronicling and telling you all, and that Daniel likes that story makes me happy because it's like, it's history, right? And it is like, it's a fun story because sometimes too, I think that there's just not enough fun and pleasure that we share with each other about the past. And that's what keeps us going. And that's what I think that unites us as queer people. We have that spirit, we have that energy to keep going. Yes. And, but the other part is like, we had so much fun. I mean, in my life, I can't tell you how much fun I had. And I try to relate that in my LA interchanges that it was fun, because without that, I don't think that I would have survived, but I wouldn't be in a place where I want to relate the story. It would just be too heavy and I'd have to process a lot more.
It's interesting that our conversation has really talked about the ways in which we're connecting things from the past to things to the future. I'm not even sure that we recognize that that through line is happening, and it really is. And it's funny because as we were doing our little research on you to prepare for this podcast, Lisette sent me a video that you did with like the LA Public Library, I believe it was, where
Right.
donated a bunch of your things to their archive because you understood the significance, the historical significance of all these tidbits of your life that you collected, you archived on your own just for your own posterity, and the ways in which that preservation, and now it's being available in this public library, allows for those connections, for those insignificant moments of joy, insignificant to the other people who are looking for how you're making a change, but so significant to the person who happened upon that flyer for that one party that you went to, that you saved, that showed who was performing when and where, and all of that visceral connection that a person can make at that time because of that one flyer that you said, hey, public library, you can now keep this in your archives. I think there's so much significance to that. And do you think that what you're doing as a historian really connects to that larger kind of timeline of history that, we're going to be here and tomorrow we're going to be gone? And so, what connection we can make is really dependent on how intentionally we are about what we're doing. So did you think about that at all? And do you think about how your historical preservation connects to that which comes after?
I do. I think about it a lot. I think about that because I was born to a family who wasn't supposed to be that, right? I wasn't supposed to be that. Nobody's supposed to remember my mother. She was a maid. She was supposed to disappear into obscurity. So I feel that it's a way for me to undo, to address, and to really just like turn things on its head a bit, because it's like, to think that my story is important, that's a big deal. I think that a lot of people can't understand that. They're like, oh, well, your story is important, but mine's not. But I see you're doing it, you're here, and it's like that makes your story important. But we've been told so often in our generation, what you're doing is not important, what your story is not important. And I just have to like change it and say, yeah, it is important. Yeah, saving these I must have known that saving these documents was important at some point. And I must have picked it up from my mother because she saved things, right? And she always shared histories with me. On some level, she knew it was important too. So I think that how we like pick up on these cues and how we manifest it in our lifetimes, I think that's the beauty of it. I worked as a construction worker for 20 years. And then when I got injured and physically couldn't do it, then I wanted to be a historian. Now, there's a reason that all kind of happened. It's a beautiful life. It's a fun life. But I think that I knew even earlier, Stephen, as you're saying, as a child, that, what we're doing is important. What we're living is important. And it had to be there. Even when I was being challenged in terms of questioning whether I fit into the world, I still knew that what I was doing was important.
My next question is a little bit heavy. The world is noisy and it's always been noisy. And so too, the joy in disruption, I think, is what really attracts these younger generations. Gen Z, I think it's what they see as important, is like, I'm going to be joyous and visible in the ways that I can be. And I feel like you were there too. But you also existed in a time as a movement leader in the 80s and 90s when visibility and inclusion and protections were even less than what we experience now, even though we know anti-trans legislation is extremely prevalent and harmful. But like living through the AIDS epidemic and a supporting community, that must have felt like a pressure cooker for you and felt painful in so many ways to experience loss at that scale. What's your advice to young queer youth who are feeling this and maybe feeling overwhelmed and not seeing a way forward, knowing that you paved a way forward? Like, what advice do you have for them?
That is a heavy question, but we've talked about this before and how I don't like to seem like I paved the way forward because it's only one road, and there are so many roads, and some roads haven't even been paved or driven on, and it's that I think is exciting. So I would like young people to see that. I hope that this story is one of possibility, and there's, if anything, we have to keep this sense of possibility open to young people. It's once they start feeling nihilistic and that they can't, and that they're blocked, or that once Donald Trump gets elected, certain things like that. I mean, that's the thing. It's like we just keep moving forward and dealing with it and chipping away. Because right now in 2024, queer rights is way different than it was, 60 years ago. And it's better. People ask me all the time, how is being queer so much easier or better? And that's a hard question in itself, because for some young queers, it's not. I think that we can't assume that, make that blanket statement, like generally over time, we can see it that it's better, but there's still young trans folks that need guidance. There's still trans folks that need role models. There's still that happening. And so I'm real hesitant to I'm leaving behind a story and a collection, as Stephen says, like all this stuff for people that future researchers, but it's not the definitive. There are just so many stories that should be told and have to be told, because that's what we've learned over all our years, that it's the different stories that make it this composite, that make our movement, and all movements are a composite of different stories. At the end of LA Interchanges, I totally burned out, and then I stopped. There was a point in that, you read it, it's toward the end, and I'm at the Catch One, and there's a Bienestar fundraiser, and the owner Jewel is there, important people are there, and I go up on the stage, and there's even like a coincidence that there's a photograph of me on the stage, and in that moment I realized that, hey, I'm not dancing anymore. I'm not feeling any joy, and I had like a breakdown of sorts, because I think that without feeling like we're progressing, without feeling like joy, without feeling like people are getting me, sometimes I think it could lead to a lot of destruction and mental health issues. When I was writing that book, I didn't know if to write more because I needed to explain it more, but I didn't. I just left it there. I know that if a reader might say, then what? Lydia just left? And it is that, because, and I had to say that, and I had to end it there, because I think if I started exploring all that I was feeling, I would have never finished that book. So it was like I had to make a decision, finish this book or start exploring those feelings of loss and grief that I was feeling, go back there and explore them. And I don't know, maybe I took the easy way out, but I just knew that I had to finish that book. And I still have that to explore and to look into. It's not a priority for me at this moment, but it's something in my life that I have to revisit. Both of my queer books, I think that in the future, like in 10 years, I might revisit them and write more about what I didn't include and the feelings that I didn't write about. Like some of the things we've talked about in terms of the shame I felt with my mother. I mean, explore these kinds of things, because why? Because I can do that. And hopefully I'll be in a place that I can do that. And it's not so much that a lot of people want to read that or going to be excited about that, but there's something in me that wants people to know that this was an experience and a feeling that was happening at that time.
All right, so this has been amazing, and I want us to end on a super positive note. So what is your hope for the future, and what do you want our young listeners, because you love the young people, to see as future possibility?
Future possibility, joy, freedom to be who you are, to have the freedom to imagine being something different. I think that sometimes some of the the queer people I relate to, there's so many boundaries and rules. You have to fit this and that. I'm like, didn't we participate in this movement to give young people the freedom to express themselves any way they want? So I think the freedom of expression, the freedom of joy, that would make me happy. If I get to be 90, I want to look back and see all this fun stuff that I couldn't predict right now that happened, new identities that popped up. I always love how young people are creating these new identities, new possibilities. That would be what I would love to see in the future.
I can't thank you enough for talking with us today. It means so much to me.
Thanks, Lizette. Thank you, Stephen. And
you are cherubic. When you said you were 72, I was like, they're a liar. They're a liar. Because I think it's just your spirit is so light. You said that you didn't write the book and there were pieces that you left out. And I see that you just have this effusive, wonderful spirit. So I'm really excited that you joined us today, because I was just like, oh, I can't wait to hear what they're going to tell us, because you just seem to have just boundless stories and energy.
Thank you. Thank you for virtual, we're on this contraption, right? Zoom, and we're reading each other's spirit. Isn't that beautiful? It's a beautiful world. Thank you.
You know that I admire you, Stephen. When I tell you that I stalk them, I'm like, will you come hang out with me? They're always thinking, but seriously, I really admire you. And I think you're not a reflection to Daniel, but I look up to you as well as I explore my own bisexuality, my own queerness, and see how I can exist more openly as a bisexual woman in the world. So I admire you. I know Daniel admires you, and Jose loved spending Friday afternoon.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Now it's time for our recurring segment, Allies and Assholes, where we highlight individuals or groups that are supporting the LGBTQIA community on the one hand and call out straight up assholes who are trying to move us all backwards on the other. Lizette, who are we talking about today?
Our ally of the week is Vivian Wilson. Vivian Wilson is one of 6 children of Elon Musk and his first wife, model Justine Wilson. Vivian recently released a public statement to set the record straight after her father, Elon Musk, took to conservative airwaves to say that the woke mind virus is the reason his child is dead, and that he was tricked into signing the forms that allowed his child to get gender-affirming care. Wilson filed a petition in Los Angeles County Superior Court in April 2022 to legally change her name and gender, citing her gender identity and the fact that I no longer live with and or wish to be related to my biological father in any way, shape, or form.
Good for you, Vivian. I see you, Vivian. People like Elon Musk need to be called out. And I love the fact that his daughter took no prisoners by calling out his bullshit.
And this is why Vivian is our ally of the week.
Congratulations to Vivian Wilson. Now on to our asshole of the week. Our asshole of the week is, not surprisingly, Elon Musk. Musk recently attacked gender-affirming care in an interview with conspiracy theorist Jordan Peterson for conservative platform The Daily Wire, claiming that the life-saving treatment killed his daughter while repeatedly misgendering her. Claiming that he's on a mission to destroy the woke mind virus that claimed his child's life, Musk continually dead-named and misgendered Vivian in his entire rant. What makes him even more deplorable is the fact that he lied on his child, forcing them to go on record to expose him as the narcissistic abuser that he is.
Okay, Stephen. So you know that I'm always talking about the grief narrative in parent communities. And I know that this is an extreme version of grief, but this is why we as parents need to stop being assholes too. And we need to change that conversation. We're not grieving our children. No one's gone. We recognize our own inner bias and we need to do the work, because Elon Musk is showing what the worst of parent attitudes and biases can look like. And so we need to do everything in our power to make the lives of our children better. So Elon Musk is going to keep being an asshole. We're going to keep dead naming Twitter and do what we can to make the world a little better.
And this is why Elon Musk is our asshole of the week. Well, that's our show for today, folks. I want to thank today's guest, Lydia Otero, for joining us today. And of course, I got it up to my co-host, Lizette, hosting the vice president's people in her house, for being the amazing person and co-host that she is.
And Stephen, we're going to be brats. This is it. You and I, we're brats for Kamala all the way, all day, until we make her president on November 9th. So thank you, Stephen. I couldn't do this this without you. And of course, we couldn't do this without the rest of the brass, our listeners. So thanks for tuning in to the Parent Advocate Podcast.
And folks, please be sure to subscribe to our podcast and YouTube channel, follow us on Instagram and TikTok, and do whatever you've got to do to stay up to date with everything going on here at the Parent Advocate Podcast. Bye.
Goodbye.